So now that the January 6th committee has subpoenaed Donald Trump to testify about the insurrection, what happens if Donald Trump defies the subpoena? Well, today, a member of the J6 committee answered that question. And his answer might surprise you. Let's talk about that, because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So now that the January 6th House Select Committee investigating the insurrection has decided to subpoena Donald Trump to testify, what's the plan? What happens if Donald Trump defies, thumbs his nose at, violates that lawfully issued congressional subpoena? Well, today we found out the answer to that question when Adam Kinzinger was interviewed by George Stephanopoulos. And what Representative Kinzinger said the answer was, if Donald Trump defies the subpoena, is, don't know. Here's today's reporting on that issue. Kinzinger, not clear what will happen if Trump refuses to testify. And that article begins, Representative Adam Kinzinger said Sunday that the House's January 6 Select Committee is not sure what will happen next if former President Donald Trump declines to testify after being issued a subpoena. Quote, he's made it clear he has nothing to hide, is what he says, the Illinois Republican said on ABC's This Week. So he should come in on the day we ask him to come in. If he pushes off beyond that, we'll figure out what to do next. The January 6 panel voted last week to bring in Trump to testify before it. We have left no doubt, none, that Donald Trump led an effort to upend American democracy that directly resulted in the violence on January 6th, the panel's chair, Representative Benny Thompson, said Thursday as members approved the subpoena. When asked by host George Stephanopoulos whether Trump should be held in contempt if he declines to testify, Kinzinger said that was up in the air. Quote, that's a bridge we cross if we have to get there, close quote, he said. Now, friends, let me be clear. I am not criticizing Representative Kinzinger or the J6 committee for not having an answer to the question, what will happen if Donald Trump defies a lawfully issued congressional subpoena? Frankly, I think we should thank our lucky stars that the J6 committee has done the work it has done and has held public hearings so we can see for ourselves the democracy-busting crimes of Donald Trump and his many co-conspirators. But they're going to have to figure it out, and probably right quick. Because do you really think Donald Trump is just going to willingly, voluntarily comply with a subpoena for testimony about the attack on the Capitol that he launched? Pretty unlikely. But let's quickly talk about the three options Congress will have if Donald Trump thumbs his nose at the J6 committee subpoena. And we've talked about this in the setting of other congressional subpoenas that were defied. The first thing they can do is vote him in contempt. And if they vote him in contempt, they're going to have two options. One, they could send the sergeant at arms out to arrest Donald Trump and detain him until he purges the contempt and agrees to testify. That would be Congress exercising what is called its inherent power of contempt. Will they do that? Not a chance. They haven't done it thus far, and I think it extraordinarily unlikely they will exercise that power for the first time to compel the testimony of a former president of the United States, though I hope they seriously consider it. The other thing they can do, they can vote to hold him in contempt, and then they can refer the contempt case for a criminal prosecution refer it to the Department of Justice. They've done that, I believe, 4 times thus far in the insurrection investigation. They did it for Steve Bannon, Peter Navarro, Mark Meadows, and Dan Scavino. And right now, the Department of Justice is batting 500. They're 2 for 4. They indicted Bannon for being in contempt of Congress, right, for committing that offense against Congress. They indicted Peter Navarro for contempt of Congress, but for whatever reason, they declined to indict Mark Meadows for precisely the same crime that Bannon and Navarro committed. And they declined to indict Dan Scavino, again, for precisely the same crime. I'm hoping that is because they have bigger criminal things in store for Mark Meadows and Scavino, and they didn't want to prematurely jump out and indict them on what is admittedly a misdemeanor charge, contempt of Congress. They're going to roll that offense into a larger conspiracy indictment. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that Mark Meadows and Dan Scavino are quietly, behind the scenes, cooperating with the prosecutor's investigation. And a third alternative is that because Meadows and Scavino were so high up in the administration, the chief of staff, and I forget what Scavino's Mickey Mouse pretend title actually was. That was snarky. Maybe they decided that these were not the right people to be indicted for contempt of Congress. I don't quite see a principled reason why that would be. Now, the second thing that they could do, Congress could do, if Trump defies the subpoena, is they could bring a suit in federal court to enforce the subpoena through civil contempt proceedings. What would that look like? Well, very briefly, the J6 committee, Congress, would bring suit to try to enforce the subpoena, to try to get a judge to order Donald Trump to comply with the subpoena for testimony. And if the judge ordered Trump to testify, and I predict the judge would, because there is legal precedent actually for a president being called before Congress to testify, then it would be really problematic for Trump if he continued to defy the subpoena, because then the judge could find him in contempt. And the judge would have a number of remedies available to force Trump to the witness chair, to force him to purge the contempt up to and including confining him until he purged the contempt. So those are the options that Congress will have when, or should I say if, Donald Trump fails to comply with the J6 subpoena. Of course, Trump himself could run to the court and file suit to try to stop the subpoena from being enforced. And then I think in substance, we would be in that sort of civil contempt proceeding posture where a judge in that suit would have to decide whether the subpoena should be enforced and Donald Trump should be ordered to testify. What happens if Donald Trump is ordered to testify? You think he's just going to willingly walk into the J6 committee hearing room and testify? Of course not. That's not the person Donald Trump is. He will file, say it with me, an appeal. And then we will be back on the hamster wheel, running endlessly and making no progress, because it will go from the trial court up to the D.C. Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, and briefs will be ordered and arguments will be scheduled, and we'll wait for a decision to be handed down. And when that decision goes against Donald Trump, he will do what? Seek review in the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court should absolutely refuse to accept the case for review, just as they did in his challenge to the Mar-a-Lago documents case that he tried to bubble up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, in substance, said, go away. We're not hearing this case. I predict that's what the Supreme Court would do with any challenge to the J6 committee subpoena trying to compel the testimony of Donald Trump. But all of that takes time. And I feel like that if the J6 committee investigation were an action adventure movie, we'd kind of be right in the car chase phase of the movie, right? With the cars kind of careening toward the end of the movie. Who's going to win, the good guys or the bad guys? Because the J6 committee has limited time to complete its business. Certainly, if the midterm elections go one way rather than the other. But friends, here's something I think we should keep an eye out for. I have a feeling that the federal courts and the federal judges are sick and tired of Donald Trump's game of trying to delay his day of reckoning, trying to run out the clock. And it may very well be that they move through any litigation concerning the validity of this J6 subpoena at light speed, in a matter of days in the trial court, not weeks, in a matter of days in the appellate court, not weeks. And then the Supreme Court might very quickly, very promptly refuse to accept the case for review. So it is conceivable that Donald Trump is actually forced into the witness chair before the J6 committee in a matter of weeks. And what will he do? Say it with me, friends. Plead the Fifth. He'll invoke his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. About that, I'm pretty certain. Because there is no way he can testify and he can be examined, cross-examined by some really accomplished former federal prosecutors who now populate the January 6th investigative team headed up by Tim Heaphy. There's no way he can withstand an examination from those men and women. He will incriminate himself early and often. So of course, he will plead the Fifth, just as he did 440 times up in New York as part of Tish James' civil fraud investigation. Criminal case wasn't even riding on that, and Donald Trump couldn't take the heat, and he had to plead the Fifth 440 times. Let me hasten to add, it's an important constitutional right that I embrace, and that, nobody should be compelled to incriminate themselves. But let's face it, particularly in the court of public opinion, when you plead the Fifth, as Donald Trump said, only mobsters plead the Fifth, only guilty people plead the Fifth, the words of Donald Trump. So yes, if push comes to shove, Donald Trump will plead the Fifth. And that will never be used against him in a criminal case, because that's how our Constitution works. That's how the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination works. It protects somebody who pleads the Fifth from ever having that used against him in a court of law, but not in a court of public opinion. So we will stay tuned to this story, friends. We will update it early and often as we learn more about it, and I suspect this will unfold just like a car chase unfolds in pretty rapid succession. So in the meantime, please stay safe, please stay tuned, and I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.